Good morning, everybody. So today I have Shawn Langa back with me. And I'll do a little bit of an introduction, but Shawn is going to be talking about value and specifically for small businesses, how we price for that value. And I think it's a really interesting conversation to have and really required. So Shawn is a seasoned business accountant and tax practitioner, and he's got over 12 years of experience. He specializes in accounting, tax compliance, and risk assessment, keeps everybody out of trouble. He also does some financial planning and modeling. And in addition to this, Shawn has many leadership positions or has held many leadership positions with Toastmasters. And most recently, he served as the finance manager for District 74, overseeing over 100 clubs. Sure. So welcome, Shawn. Thank you for being here and for having the conversation with us today. I'm going to kick off by asking you a question around value. What, if you had to pick one word that describes value in the small business space, what would that word be?
Sure. The first answer one would say is money, but that's not always the case, right? It's not always the case.
Okay. Okay. I think that's really interesting. You know, when I started out my consulting business, that was a really big thing for me to be able to, get past that hurdle. And for anyone that's starting a business, everybody's got to understand what is the value that they have, what is the problem that they're actually solving, how are they going to solve that problem, what's the distribution point, so how they're going to deliver that service or product to people. And then the other part is making sure that you've got money coming in, so there's a flow of money, and then making sure that you've got customer insights. But all of it sort of ties in together with that big word, value. And, in your experience, I'd really like to know from you, in helping small businesses, how does that play out in the small business world? What are some of the problems and challenges that you see people having, when they don't get it right?
The biggest problem for me has always been, that's why I said money, it's cash flow. When you're a small business, you don't always have access to credit facilities. You don't have access to a lot of credit lines, and ultimately you have to make sure that you're bringing in more money than you are spending. And your distribution channel, like you said, it speaks to that. If you can minimize the cost of getting your product or service out there, and while you're actually pricing it higher than you're spending, it really does help. And for me, I've seen a lot of businesses where they focus on the sales and how many units they can put out, and they push out as much as they can, but it ends up costing them more money to actually go out there and actually put their services out there or put their products out there, and they don't focus on their cash flow, and they borrow from Peter to pay Paul. This client pays them, they take that money, they pay for the next client's order, etc., etc., as opposed to actually making sure that every you know project that they embark on actually finances itself, until they're in a position to actually access those credit lines. So that has always been the biggest challenge, in creating value, because at the end of the day, your end product suffers because you start cutting costs in terms of what you start getting your product at a cheaper cost so that you can bring down the cost, and people can see the value deteriorate over time of either it's your product or service, depending on what it is. Even with your service, you no longer have the right talent because you're not paying at the right price, and your clients are the ones that suffer.
Yeah, 100%. Or you're playing in the wrong sector, right? You either have devalued yourself to a point where, you're not competitive anymore. And I see that happening, especially in the service industry. where, value is intangible. It's an intangible thing because it's not a product. It's actually something that people are experiencing, that's what people are getting. Even though in a product space, people are still experiencing that product, but it is a little bit more tangible in terms of how you get to that, pricing, which brings me to pricing models. I know that the biggest thing is being able to understand what your cost breakdowns look like, right? What does it actually cost you to deliver that product or service? What are some of the things that you find people, don't pick up on, that they kind of miss the boat on when it comes to pricing models, and specifically, understanding what your costs are?
The way I have an approach, especially for small businesses, I tend to have a system where you work from the bottom going up. So when we talk about bottom working up is we look at your fixed costs. What are your fixed costs? Let's start there. Let's determine what will be those costs that you need to keep your offices open. And these are normally your payroll, your rentals, if you've got office spaces, you know. And then from there, we start looking at the variables, because the variables can always be, they depend on how much you put out. So then we look at the variables, we work our way up from there. And then from there, we have an understanding of what are the costs that will be relevant to this project or whatever product you're working on. And obviously with the fixed costs, we then break that down to say this is how much they contribute towards a unit. So if you're selling, let's say, for example, you're in the business of selling phones, how much does each phone contribute towards your fixed cost? And then you start looking at saying, okay, cool, for this, I know I'm going to put it in 100 Rand, for example, towards that from my fixed cost. Then your variables, those come with the phone. So you already know that in order for me to get this phone, there's delivery. If you're bringing the phone from overseas, there's shipping, there's import duties and all of that. But those you can always calculate based on that. And then from there, you decide, what do I want to have as my takeaway? How much do I want to make as a person? Then you add that on top of everything else. And then you can say, this is the minimum price that I'm likely to go to. So your cost, I always say, should be the driving force behind your minimum selling price of your unit. So like I said, your rentals, your payroll cost, your telephone cost, if you fix it, great. But I also encourage people to always look at having variable costs where you can. So meaning if you can attach a specific cost to revenue, that's great. For example, some people that operate in malls, they sell in malls. Instead of paying a fixed cost for a mall, a stall, it's always ideal for you to speak to the mall and say, how about we do revenue split? Meaning 5% or 10% of my revenue, you will get a share of that. So you know that if I sell 100 units, I'm gonna pay rent. If I sell 0 units, I'm gonna pay no rent. You see, so where you move the fixed cost into variables, that's where you would start being cash flow positive as opposed to just carrying costs that don't make any sense in the beginning.
I love that. When I look at it as a consultant, I look at, the cost per product, at the end of the day. All of those costs combined, how much does it cost you to make this product and deliver it, as you mentioned. But it's always tricky in the service industry. So tell me, how would you price happy if I'm selling happy?
So if you can't put a price on happy, by the way, it's priceless. But if we had to do it for somebody, I would definitely, um, I would have a zero-based budget approach. But also if I had to put, at the end of the day, happy, what does it take for you to get there? So Melissa. let's talk about happy. What is included in happy? What is happy? What is the end product for happy? Let's break down at least one line item, one product, because you've got various. Let's
Okay,
work on
cool.
one.
Well, for me, it's a service offering in terms of a program that companies can do. So an employee happiness program or employee well-being, and that may involve individual items like training or workshops, that kind of thing. And those things I can cost in terms of, time, um, you know, travel materials, any other licensing that needs to happen or take place, and research and collateral that I may have to purchase. So that's kind of like what I would use. But in terms of like experience and consulting hours, are there any tips for people out there, like coaches and people that are offering this kind of service in terms of consulting hours or hourly rates?
So I'm not a huge fan of hourly rates, by the way. I'm a huge fan of value pricing.
Okay.
Hourly rate does take away from value pricing because what it does, it simply says my hours worth this much. And the more you become a seasoned person in your
Mhm.
space, the quicker it takes you to do certain things. And you're always stuck in that mindset of my hours worth this much, and you underprice yourself. And that's where in the servicing space we see people underpricing themselves because they go for the hourly method. So value pricing, you can look at it from, okay, like you listed right now, you listed certain items that go towards achieving your end goal. When you deliver this service to the client, you've listed what goes into it. And I think that's a great approach for a lot of people. Have that approach to your service. Rather list what you need to achieve this. And then from there, look at, once again, I'm a huge fan of adding markups to your cost as a starting base. And then once you've got that markup in place, then you can consider, you know what, this is how much I'm offering this service. And clients are likely to appreciate that more than, oh no, I do five. For example, you'll say as a coach, I charge 1,000 rand per hour. Now the client is thinking, how long will this take? You're like, it will take about 10 hours to do. The client is thinking 10,000 Rand. That's the client. They're budgeting 10,000 Rand. And then they get a final invoice. It's 15,000 Rand. What happened? You see what I mean?
Mm.
And people shy away from those. But if you say to the client, this is what I provide, this is what you're getting in the service, you already know how long it will take you. You've got experience. You'll give them and say, this is how much it will. You've also factored in how much your hourly rate would be. You know how much you charge per hour on a normal product service like this, and you factored that in. So if it's a 10-hour service, you know that for a normal client, you'll charge 1,000 Rand per hour. You can simply say 10,000 Rand. And even if you know very well that you're good at what you do and it might take you 7 hours, you see, you've sort of made a 3,000 Rand profit on that, extra profit on that, as opposed to if you had done it per hour. But, it works both way. You
Yeah.
might do 15 hours and you've undercut yourself, but ultimately you will be able to budget a lot better and be able to know how many of these I need to sell or need to actually have. How many clients do I need to service in a specific month for the specific product? So
I
if
love
you,
that
if
because
you,
that
yeah.
talks to your goals, your business goals, planning, that kind of thing, what you have to put into marketing in order to get there. So really, really great insights. Thank you. Thank you so much for those. I feel like we got really interesting tips from you. Um, yeah, and I'm gonna ask you as a closing, what is one sort of tip that you would give to people, one piece of advice that you would want to you share with people that will make a difference if they do it immediately? And And I will also share my piece of advice.
I think for me, break your current product and service offering, break it into a million pieces, and then put it together and see how much it costs you to put it back together. And that value, that's where you start seeing the value and creating the value. We, as opposed to just continuously going ahead with the same thing that you've done before. Break it, reconstruct it, and plan forward. And don't be afraid to plan.
I love that. I once helped a friend start a baking business. And so we had to, price all the different products, how much she was using, the oven usage, the electricity usage, the space usage, and then you're having a completely different conversation about pricing. So I love that. Break it down into little puzzle pieces, and then put it all back together again. So thank you for that, Shawn. My tip is going to be don't eat your stock. So and that's why I'm not a chocolate maker or a chocolatier, because if I had to be a chocolate maker, I don't think I'd have any stock to sell because I'd all be guzzling it in the morning. Thank you so much for that conversation. It really was really insightful. I think anyone that has a small business can take any one of these tips that you've shared with them and apply it. And if they want to get a hold, if people want to get a hold of you to ask you more questions, or to ask for your insights, how should they get a hold of you?
Very simple. Connect at mcponline.co.za or just search for the Compliance Clinic. You will find.
Thanks so much, Shawn. Thanks. We loved having you today, and we hope to have a conversation with you in future.
Thank you, Melissa. Definitely.